My guest is Ryan Timmins, the Senior Lecturer at ACU in Brisbane, and we'll be discussing everything you need to know when it comes to mitigating hamstring injuries, but also helping athletes return back to their sport safely, and the latest research and more importantly, how to apply that research. So make sure you get the notepads out. If you're tuning in live on social media or on YouTube, feel free to hit us up with some questions, and I'm sure we'll find some time at the end. But thanks for jumping on, Ryan. Really looking forward to the chat.
Thanks, Jack. It's good to be here, and it's good to hopefully I keep a few people awake that are around the world that are woken up early. But it's always an evolving space, the hamstring world. So hopefully I can give some insight into what's the most common issue that you all come across out in the field. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is ever evolving, and I know. I think when I first met you, I was at Hawthorn. We brought a player down with Ben Jansen, the rehab coach, and straight away I could see the way that you were applying, the intensity of training, especially for the supernatural eccentric work, was completely different to how I was doing things at the time. So I have no doubt now that was a few years ago. There's some things and bits and tips and tricks that we can all learn to apply to help athletes, either hopefully never get a hamstring strain, or if they've had one, and hopefully it's their last. But yeah, I guess for those that aren't aware of your work, mate, there'd be only a couple, I'd imagine. You've been on a few podcasts, and obviously in the research world, you're well known from hamstring and return to play. But for those that aren't, mate, do you mind providing a bit of a background, I guess, your passion for the industry and why you started in the industry of sports science, exercise science, and strength and conditioning, but also, some work experiences you've done along the way.
Yeah, I guess my passion kind of evolved out of, I guess most of us, we either involved in sport or played sport at a different age. And then I went to university, and actually, to be fair, my first degree that I got enrolled in at university was dentistry. And opted out of that after, got enrolled and did all that stuff, and then just thought, I might take a year off anyway. And then thought, maybe I'll just be a PE teacher and then go down that route. And got halfway through the degree, got exposed to a few people at university that were quite involved. So Tony Shield at QT, who's one of the, I guess I'd say, and this is just probably a spoiled view, that one of the best resistance training lecturers in Australia, if not the world. It's just the way he delivers and the content that he uses is just phenomenal. And just seeing Tony at work and kind of piqued my interest in the stuff that he's involved in and how he was teaching. And across that time, I still had the view in my head that I want to be a physio because, as you said, it's a fickle industry at times, and the physio, it's always that kind of glamour position where you can go work at the clinic, you can do sport, you can do everything. And I thought, I'll go be a physio, and then I thought, no, let's try and do a bit of research first. Now it's kind of evolved into a space where we try as a group use strength and conditioning principles and approaches to address an injury that occurs a lot. So can we then kind of demystify a lot of the prescription and the variability and what people are doing from a injury prevention point of view that historically came from physios to then evolve now into an industry where we see now in Australia, the common coaches and prevention guys are strength and conditioning trained. So, so that's kind of where I've been at ACU for the last 10 years, and prior to that was the QT. Outside of that, have worked in soccer, mainly in the A-League in Australia. So depending on people's perspective of what elite sport is, the A-League is actually it's a decent level, entertaining A-League, but yes, they do question sometimes the quality of athlete. There's no football, it's an athlete, so the difference between the two, especially in soccer, it's this unique beast, as I'm sure you're aware. So just this kind of, and it's been helpful to help me merge the reality of how to apply a stimulus or an outcome or intervention on an athlete to then also what we see in the paper and in reality doing that on the ground. And I think the biggest evidence of that is sometimes the Nordic interventions that get put out in the evidence become so successful, but actually the implication, the use on the field in reality doesn't work. So it's kind of loosely how I got into it, where I am, and how I've kind of evolved and where I am now.
Yeah, like you said, a great range of different experiences, both in research and in the applied setting. So handy for anyone listening, whether you're an athlete or a coach or a researcher, scientist. You can hopefully get some takeaways. Was that always your intention to sort of explore all the different, I guess, wear all the different hats in the development stages? And you mentioned Tony. Have there been other strong influences or mentors, if you like, along the way that helped shape your philosophy?
Um, yeah, I think Tony is kind of for us as a group of us, and for me, my PhD supervisor David Opar, who's still at ACU, was a PhD student with Tony at the time, and I think across that lab and that space and time, there's been 4 or 5 PhD graduates that have all kind of finished with Tony and have gone out their own way and have now evolved large portions of the industry. And Dave was one of those, and I was just very fortunate to be a QT at the same time Dave was. And I was a Sunny Coast boy, didn't know any different. Dave's from Victoria. When he went back home after his PhD, and I followed him down to Victoria at ACU and lived 10 years in Victoria and tried to figure out what a winter was. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it was, yeah, so I think that was a big thing for me, was to experience something different, and that allowed me to, I guess, evolve some of the approaches we did. But a lot of that critical thinking, that ability to kind of take a step back and go, what are we actually trying to achieve? What's the outcome that we want? What's the adaptation that you're trying to drive, or the stimulus that you're trying to promote? And then what's the evidence behind it? Can we find more? Is there a space where, the old 3 sets of 10 body weight exercise sometimes doesn't cut it? So how do we then evolve that? But yeah, that's kind of, I think for me, between Dave and Tony, we've had a lot of, I guess, experiences and outcomes that I think I wouldn't be able to get without those two kind of helping me through the jungle. So.
Mm-hmm. And highlights over your career, mate, that you sort of spring front of mind that you're proud of that you got to experience?
I was fortunate enough to be at a few A-League clubs when they've won the illustrious toilet seat, the golden toilet seat they call it in the A-League, because it literally looks like a toilet seat. So celebrating those grand finals, a lot of people never win one, let alone experience one. And there's been a few on the honour roll now. So that was from a professional aspect outside of the research world, being able to experience how, in the industry you can all work together and have the outcome that you can get the 11 blokes in the field, but it comes down to 90 minutes in a game, and how do they stay out there, and that kind of an enjoyable occasion for me. From a research world, I guess, I think just being able to complete a PhD and get through that space. It's not like, nowadays it's becoming more and more common to have people who might do a PhD and might be based in industry, and it might be GPS based, it might be injury mechanisms based. But a lot of my stuff was large laboratory stuff. It was creating new concepts out of theoretical models that really hadn't been tested in athletes, let alone humans. So being able to pull that off in a place that I've never been to, and I've never been to Victoria prior to that. So, and then living there and managed to still be around for 10 years post. So, yeah, I think that's probably a big part of it. But, and again, it comes back to the people you get around you. I think we're very fortunate again at ACU to have a great team of people at ACU and support from university, but also the knowledge that we got from Tony across the years is just, I think it'll be immeasurable when we all kind of look back in a few decades' time.
Mm-hmm. And what about on the flip side, the most, I guess, biggest challenges that you've faced over your career, and how did you sort of grow, or what did you learn from those experiences?
I think the biggest challenges have always been professional jealousy. I guess not so from my end, but people kind of pot shotting you on social media or other various kind of views because they don't agree with how you operate or how things are done, and sometimes can get quite blunted and kind of to the point. And I guess dealing with that in a way where you don't I guess, turn around and look at it as a attack, but more of a way of an opportunity to evolve and grow and make things different. So yeah, it's actually quite. Sometimes in Australia it's the tall poppy syndrome, but yeah, there's a lot of European researchers that can occasionally, and especially in our world, raise their voice in I guess opposition of stuff that you're doing without providing alternatives. And I guess always being collegial, I guess for me was the outcome of that was not so much to turn around and go, stuff, yeah, I'm not listening to your opinion and I'm going to smash it for the rest of my 25 years working, whatever. Instead of trying to go, okay, can we work together to find a solution? But don't get me wrong, it's very challenging when you get those or you see those things, you go, what stuff these people. But you got to check yourself a few times, and definitely a challenging moment, I think, from a to remove that outside noise sometimes, and to then have the ability to apply that to, I guess, an improvement or an outcome or opportunity to get better. Takes a bit of time to develop, but yeah, the mid 20-year-old Ryan would have absolutely gone off the rails and had a bit of pot, but yeah, that's definitely, that was, for me, was probably the biggest challenge so far.
And is that once you start, I guess, putting your name out there and publishing work, is that when you start to attract those opinions and more in the public setting, I guess?
Which is a good thing, right? Like, it means that people are reading what you're doing, and the fact that an Italian or a Spanish person is trying to rip off your work or smash it or whatever, from an aspect of a guy who's born in Rockhampton in Queensland, you go, oh, that's actually pretty cool. Some bloke in Milan's kind of rubbishing your work, but then you also look back on it and go, hold on a sec, like, just talk to me, mate. But sometimes that in that world, it's a dog eat dog kind of industry, whereas we're competing for funding, we're competing for sometimes notoriety and those things, and it almost is tall poppy syndrome, where they go, okay, well, I'm going to knock you down so that I can knock myself up, and then I'll be looking like the guy that smashed you, and then I'll have that on my track record. And you go, yeah, definitely. It's surprising for me. I thought, I guess retrospectively 10 years ago, when you think of the research world, you just think of, okay, let's be as rigorous as we can to create evidence that might support or disprove something, and then that would talk for itself. But there's so much more outside of that than just, hey, his outcome A is influenced by variable X. It's now, how do you sell it? How do you market it? How do you then use that to build your case for funding and industry support and getting partners? And all that nowadays, especially, is a lot for just doing these. Then the opinions come. So they're always fun.
Yeah, got to have a thick skin. Well, we'll move into our key topic, hamstrings. I guess, just to kick it off more broadly, do you feel like in elite sport, are we making progress in terms of reducing the likelihood of hamstring strains in field team-based sports like soccer and Australian rules football and rugby? And if so, where do you think where have we made progress in that setting? Is it because of the research more research informed, or is it the technology and advancements in technology? I guess this is over the last sort of 10 years.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of everything, right? You can kind of look at it. Obviously, you're on the ground as well, and you think of in the last 10 years. I think let's take AFL for an example, because that's one of the topics. It's kind of, we know in the AFL over the last 8 years, the AFL is now much stronger with how much eccentric hamstring work they do. We know the first ever Nord board study that was done in 2013 season. People are now about 130, 150 newtons on average stronger. So over the last 8 years, the league's just gotten stronger. But is that because you can now measure it? Because you now have access to that technology, you can have the ability to train that outcome. It's like you do a bench press, you know that your bench is maybe 100 kilos, you want to get 120, so you just do more bench press. So all variations to get that. Whereas today in the Nordic, Whereas previously people were doing it, weren't knowing how strong they were, then they realised actually I can be much stronger, and then now on average everyone's much stronger. So
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if we had this kind of technology or this insight in the 90s, like we have a bench press, you move as much weights on the bar, everyone's quite, well, to with an extent, they're relatively strong. Um, but then from a hamstrings perspective, if we'd had an extra decade on this, that had made a difference. Um,
Yeah. Yep.
but yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, the fact to be able to measure and then internalize and go, actually, I want to be stronger at this because I know I'm below average, or if I'm at this level, my risk of injury is X, so I need to be stronger. But I guess on the flip side of that, in the AFL, we know at least probably the last 5 or 6 years, the numbers are dropping. So the amount of injuries that we're getting, it used to be 6 or 7 per club per season. It's the 4 or 5. So, that's a decent drop, a 15-20% drop. But they're maybe happening less frequently, but now everyone's out for longer.
Right. More
So
severe.
and so you wonder, and again, that also coincides with the whole intramuscular tendon conversation, the treatment of those injuries, how conservative they need to be, how progressive and I guess almost aggressive you can be with those, and do you treat the MRI versus the patient, and those kind of conversations then evolve. So I think we're definitely getting stronger, say in AFL, even staying in Australian soccer. From anecdotally, I'd say they're getting a lot stronger. As is again as a population, there's definitely going to be teams who probably don't have an approach or don't want to do that kind of stuff and have different outcomes. And you witness that firsthand where some people will go from one club to another club as a high performance manager and go, spent 4 or 5 years, make them really strong, sweet, go to a new club, and they're actually quite weak. So, but as a population, they're stronger than they were. But yeah, I think in Australia, we're fortunate because we don't have 48 games a year or 52 games, every 60 something weeks or something like that they do in European soccer. So we're very fortunate. A-League runs max 30 games a year. AFL, if you get to the pointy end of September, you're maybe looking at the mid-20s. So same with rugby league and AFL union. So you kind of go, well, in that period, providing a stimulus, a couple of gym sessions a week, running fast, they're all things that we can do at that level. And over the last 10 years, we've had the capacity to understand that more. But then when you go to European soccer, that changes again. So you've got so many cultures, you've got 3 games a week, and then making an intervention or an adaptation in that period is obviously a big challenge for those out there. So, but obviously in Australia where we are, it's I think we're very
A little bit more
spoiled.
blessed.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
very lucky. But yeah, I think we're definitely making inroads. I think it's just then compliance is going to be a big thing. At the elite level, it's easy because you can pay a coach, you can have a team that has a structure and a setup where there is almost enforced compliance. But then you go to a community level sport and it just changes again, and it relies on the individual athlete or the coach to drive a philosophy or a culture to adapt. I think with the advent of things like the FIFA 11 Plus and those preventative measures that even drip feeding into, say, rugby league and community level AFL to an extent, just prepping to land, prepping to run, prepping to get stronger. Those things that community level sports are doing now, completely different to what they were doing 10 years ago. So I think they've advanced that space, but then compliance is always a big thing, right? You've got those 34-year-old midfielders that just turn up at 10 past 7, miss the warm-up and just go straight into training and then just go home first one. So then how do you then make them adapt and stronger? And I think that community space doesn't get the bright lights and the shiny kind of accolades because no one really, it's not a $1 billion industry like the AFL is. So I definitely think it's a space that needs a bit more time, but someone's got to fund it at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. That's interesting. That that I guess a reduction in occurrences, but the severity is higher, and that from a I guess practical setting, what would be some of your favourite sort of exercises when it comes to mitigating hamstring injuries? You mentioned the Nordic. Um, I guess yeah. What are some others? And then how in a football club like AFL, rugby, and soccer, where you're playing around 30 competitive games, do you stick with a proximal hammy exercise and a more distal one and stick with those, or do you like to fluctuate it throughout the season? What's your sort of stance on I guess how you change your exercises if you do
Yeah, I guess
periodize?
it's
Yeah.
no, it makes sense, and that's one thing I think again has evolved over the last 10 years. In that we never used to periodize these things, right? You think of even early 2000s where there's just here's 3 sets of 10, do this, have a heavy band, do that. We used to periodize some of your on-field ranks. We didn't really have good, strong GPS numbers. It was just purely distance. To now where we can do all that stuff a bit better. Again, community sports different. Um, but I guess my question always comes back to is depends on the adaptation you want. So I think it's from an outcome of what's the better exercises for this, the better exercise for that. And there's always going to be 3 or 4 things that will give you what you want. But then if you know the adaptation you want to drive, if the adaptation is to reduce injury risk, well, there's 2 or 3 exercises we know in the Nordics. One of those, the other one's run fast. So you do an eccentric exercise and you run fast, you'll probably be in a good space. But then there's so much in that gets kind of lost sometimes. In that, if I just do 2 sets of 4 Nordics and I run fast once a week, I'll be sweet. I'll do that for 40 weeks. But then people just forget progression, periodization, overload, this whole concepts. So if you roll out injury prevention exercise in week 1, people adapt. You don't have an overload. There's no stimulus. There's no kind of continual adaptation because they're scared of damage, soreness, and pain. But again, if you do a bench press, it's a great example because more of us probably do bench press. But you do bench press, you keep doing bench press all season, you might add some more weight, you might go up and down, but soreness kind of doesn't really bump up above a 3 or 4 out of 10 unless you're going stupidly heavy. And by then, you normally do it away from the game anyway. So why can't these exercises be any different? So I think that's always gets lost in that kind of space of I will just do 2 sets of 4 because it's just the Nordic. It's just one of those. It's like our calf raises or our shoulder bands or whatever it is. I will just do 3 sets of 10, 2 sets of 4. So at a kind of base level of do eccentrics and run fast, they'll be pretty strong in how you reduce your risk of injury moving forward. How you do why that I think is the area that's evolving more, and because we all want we want the best bang for a buck. So we're going to go minimalistic in what we do to reduce our risk of injury, and hopefully keep in the field longer. So we did a study looking at the low volume Nordics versus a high volume Nordic intervention, but it still shows that you need a period of high volume eccentric stimulus to drive adaptation. So you can't just roll in week 1 of preseason, do 2 sets of 4 for 40 weeks and hope that you adapt. You need some high volume at some point, so the periodization becomes there. And that I guess goes for anything, right? So you might have an athlete who's got a bad knee and can't do a Nordic because PCL issues and that anterior compression causes their discomfort. So you got to give them something else. Hammies crossing the hip, sweet, let's do something at the hip. Again, similar concepts apply, right? You can't just do 2 sets of 4 of a single leg eccentric back extension or an RDL lower or something like that. There's progression, there's overload, there's intensity. With the Nordic, intensity is kind of something managed by your ability to do the exercise and your body weight. Whereas the other ones, it's the weight on the bar, it's the velocity of the move, those kind of things that make it a bit easier to prescribe. So I think that's just one area that we just underappreciate sometimes, and the prescription of it.
Mm-hmm.
So and that all feeds into the adaptation that you want, right? Like if you only just get real bulk thick hamstrings do high volume, right? But no one's going to do 5 sets of 10 Nordics. Whereas, like, if you want strong, lift heavy for lower reps, it's the same concepts. But we don't progress and we don't periodize the Nordic for whatever reason. And whether it's not the Nordic, again, if it's a back extension, RDL, if it's, we just say chuck 60 kilos on the bar because you can't be bothered to take 220s off. Like, just do that for 40 weeks. Like, how does that then drive an adaptation? So you adapt to a certain point, and we all know that to adapt further, you need to overload. That just never comes. And because it's the hamstrings, people forget about it sometimes. And it's not your big rocks like your squat, your bench, your dead. So it just gets lost outside that half-hour gym sesh. So I think that kind of base question, I think that probably, for me, it underpins a lot of concepts around interventions and adaptations is, what are we trying to drive? What adaptation do we want here? Or do we want to investigate or test? Because then we probably need to program that intervention appropriately based on that. And I think that's a big area, is not as, because people always try and go into that's best bang for the buck, one exercise, one outcome, happy days. But I think how you do that and how you prescribe it is pretty key.
Thanks for that. That's a good insight into, I like the connection with the bench press. Everyone understands for a lot of people that have gone into the gym, you've probably gone through a bench press program and that's been progressive, and you work towards your PB. And it's no different with the Nor board, I guess. If you want to get that force up, get those numbers up, you've got to put it in a periodized plan. Probably hard to answer, but I guess for someone that is looking to, maybe they're below the 400 newtons, or they're below what they're perceived, eccentric strength, max force is an issue for them, and they want to work on that. Do you feel, for bang for buck, minimum effective dose, like you mentioned, it's the weighted Nordic in that aspect, or do you use tempo type of work where they're trying to really extend how long they can hold that eccentric contraction for? So more your lower rep sort of stuff, quality over volume, or do you just need to go through a program where you do high volume work, high frequency, maybe 2-3 times a week, and then start to ramp up the intensity once you've got that base underneath you?
Yeah, I guess, it could go either way, right? I think one thing with the Nordic is a lot of people, especially if they're practicing it or just doing it training, most of them will just spend a lot of time early in the phase, get to here, and then drop.
Spend all their tickets in the shorter.
Yeah, and then they're gone, they're gassed by here. Whereas if you just ignore that, you kind of dive out to here, and then you slam the brakes on as you go, and you get stronger in that outer range, that adaptation's probably going to be better from a longer term, from a strength data perspective. It also means that if you get out to here, and say you can't get out to there, right? So a lot of people get to this point and go, I'm too weak, I'm just going to drop. That's where you probably can make the most out of a higher frequency, more tempo kind of based thing. Just get smaller range of motion, greater amount of reps, get stronger, and then try and get out longer. But I think when you got guys who are probably getting able, participant people who are getting out that further part of the range, adding weight becomes a big thing, because the concept and for the Nordic is the way the exercise is kind of prescribed and done is that gravity needs to win at some point. There's all, you see all these athletes going all the way down and coming back up, which is cool from a circus trick and kind of social media perspective. But what's the goal of the exercise? The goal of the exercise is to be strong eccentrically. So let's overload that eccentric phase. Like, there's no point coming back up. You might as well get real strong. You might as well try and hold as much weight as you can and drop here instead of trying to get all the way down and then try to get all the way back up. You get more weight, have a great stimulus at a longer length from a hamstring perspective than trying to get down here and come back up, because then the limiting factor is going to be concentric strength, not the eccentric strength.
Yep.
So I think in that aspect, obviously those people are quite strong, right? To be able to do that, you've got to be able to overcome the effects of gravity. Well, I think in the Nordic, gravity needs to win. I think it needs to be a point where your hamstring can't produce enough force to withstand the external load that gravity has on pulling you down. Obviously, a lot of things come into play. The amount of body mass above the knee, all those kind of things will impact that. Whereas if you get strong, um, you can probably add a bit of weight to the chest and progress that, and that will help you bump your numbers much quicker. But then, yeah, if you've got so many other variables, like you said, that go into it, is people who are 5'2" versus those who are 6'7", there's different levers above and below the knee. You can see people who are 5'2" Nordicing over 400 plus, and you see guys 6'7" that struggle to get past here just because of the levers. So you can try again and promote that adaptation and be really good in that early range, and then progress that into a longer range. But yeah, I think it's it's kind of like most exercises, right? You can do lift heavy frequently, and you're probably going to get stronger. Whereas if you lift lighter more frequently, you're probably going to get bigger. But then how you progress that within what your goals are, and if you want to get stronger Nordic numbers, then go out longer, do that heavy, and be stronger out here. That'll also hope then transfer some eccentric strength when you're out in the track as well.
Is it similar with increasing fascicle length? That the eccentric portion and that outer range should be the priority?
Yeah, well, again, that's I think it's hard to say because we haven't really looked into it too much in the Nordic from a range perspective, but we know that intensity is a big thing to drive that adaptation. If you do just a bodyweight Nordic intervention for 6 weeks versus a Nordic intervention with overload progressively, the amount of adaptation is greater. And those that have extra weight used to their chest, they get stronger, they get longer fascicles. Whereas those that just do body weight get stronger but don't really adapt as much in that fascicle lengthening perspective. And while strength gain is good, you can do that and that's fine. But again, you still either need high volume or high intensity, I think, to drive strong fascicle adaptation, especially within the biceps femoris anyway.
And from a you mentioned mitigating the aspect, how important sprinting is as well. I guess for an athlete that's just suffered a hamstring injury, no specific grade or type of injury, but just in general, a hamstring injury. What would be some of your big rocks? And maybe we'll go with the community-based athlete. So, what are some key areas that perhaps they're a week or two down, the physio's ticked them off to they're ready to run and do their strength work, so they're pain-free from that aspect. Yeah, where would you like to start with them in the gym and on the field?
Like I said, the high-speed running is a very underappreciated thing because we can't control it half the time, especially in that community level sport. You can't really. It's hard to 90%, 95%, just fast, mate. Because at that level, you can top that. Over 20 meters of time can be different. So we focus on what we do in the gym, do in that space, we can control that a lot more. So I think, I think running, I think a good thing in my mind is being able to sprint pain-free, but whilst you say you're pain-free in the assessment of the clinic, sprinting pain-free and having no apprehension to open up is a big thing. They're kind of different things, right? You can be pain-free on movement and outcomes and whatever, but if you get out in the field and you feel like you can't get over that 90% because you're just apprehensive or you don't feel like you have the kind of the capacity to do it, then I think that might be a good gauge of they might need a bit more work, a bit more time. I think an aspect is then, okay, how do you build up to that? You progressively overload, you introduce some high speed stuff, maybe some shorter meters and some longer meters. But at the end of the day, I think a big thing that's underappreciated is someone's capacity to run fast relative without apprehension. They might be able to do that pain free, or it might have a little bit of pain, but they can do it and not be apprehensive about it and hit a 90-95%. That's pretty good from my end. But yeah, they get early days, they go out in the field. I think one thing that does also get lost sometimes is the use of alternative exercises and not focus on the hammy.
Mm-hmm.
So they might spend a lot of time in glutes or lower back or bracing exercises and all these other things. And then as a result, that takes away from hamstring stuff. So I think the biggest thing is, and when you start running again, there's this concept of, well, I'm now going to be sore from doing the exercises. I don't want to run because I'm sore. So the exercises are the thing that gets dropped because everyone just wants to run because running is important to play sport. So they'll stop doing their exercises when they get cleared to return to play, especially at a community level. If you don't have an S&C or a coach looking after them, they won't do their bridges, they won't do their Nordics, they won't do their sliders. They'll just go out and just start doing their runs. And, oh, yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. And I'll be sore from the runs, I won't do that tomorrow. And then they just kind of forget. And that's just this kind of spiral of, well, I don't do anything for a couple of days. Then you try and reintroduce it, and you get DOMS, and you get sore again. And then you kind of spiral and you just never do it. And then I wonder why they were injured, because they might be sprinting, they might be going okay, but they haven't got this kind of the capacity to build the engine in the gym and then using it on the track. So that's a big thing in being able to continually do exercises. And I think the big thing, three that I would typically get hammy based and purely like lab based, if we have access to it, is 45 degrees back extension, Nordic, and a slider variation. So the valve slides, or we have one hanging from the roof, which is a bit more challenging. Doing them consistently, single leg variations of the back extension, and then single leg variations of sliders, we found quite good. But then, again, not dropping off on those key gym-based exercises just because you start running again. Because then, you find yourself in a spiral going, I haven't done a Nordic for 4 weeks. I need to do Nordics again. And then you'll be sore. So once you are back and cleared, it's just a case of then, if the consistent application of eccentric stimulus is one thing that once you take it away, we know the spiral becomes greater, but then the recovery becomes so much harder because your DOMS comes back in, you're probably playing again, you're probably training twice a week. So the capacity to then go, I need to do 2 sets of 4 Nordics again, and you get just sore. It's going to become the lowest in the priority. So I think once cleared to kind of get back into that space of return to play, running, sprinting, max efforts, it's just to ensure that stuff doesn't drop off, because it's easy to just bench it. Just focus on your running, do your running, go back to play some footy, play on the weekend, then you turn around, it's been 2 weeks, haven't done Nordic, and you go,
Hard to play catch up.
Am I doing? Yeah, especially in season. It's the big thing.
Where conversely, you can sort of maximize that time where you maybe not running fast due to the apprehension, like you said, make some really good strength gains, and it pays dividends when you've built up that capacity. Makes a lot of sense, and I guess it's empowering for parents and community athletes as well, that there's not, I guess, the back extension. Most gyms, Globo gyms, would have that these days, you'd think. Certainly the valve slide, you did have the sock on a wooden floor, and then the Nordics body weight, just get a pillow underneath the knees. So and sprinting, obviously, you don't need anything. So that's a good program right there, world class, and don't need much.
That's it.
What about on the flip side? I know a lot of pro teams, professional athletes, you'll consult. Like what typically, I guess they've had a bad run with it. What do you typically see? It doesn't necessarily need to be mistakes that have been made, but what are some common, I guess, trends that you see with athletes have had a bad run? What have you sort of learnt by having the finger on the pulse from that sense to, I guess, conversely, we could try and prevent athletes getting to that point?
I guess, again, you're looking at it, the prescription becomes a big thing as well. So you're looking at, you might try to help organisations and individuals, and they might say, here's the program for the last couple of months. And they say they're doing hammy exercises, but it might be variations of Bosch holds, it might be isometric stuff, and then they might tickle some eccentric work a little bit, but most of it's a variation of an RDL, or they might do a back extension where it's 45-degree back extension, concentric and eccentric. So you're looking at it, you've got a lot of hammy exercises, a good 5 or 6 or 7 hammy exercises there, but there's no eccentric overload. So where's that eccentric overload coming from? We know, again, whether there's a lot of people in the camp, they don't think a Nordic's good exercise. Completely fine with that. You need to find some eccentric overload, right? If you're using an RDL, if you're using back extension, and they're your own kind of hammy exercises, where's that eccentric overload coming? Unless you're providing that eccentric overload in those exercises, which is also done and is pretty common, how ensuring that happens is a big thing. And if you're an advocate for all the isometric stuff and that the Bosch holds and all those things, no problem. But we know that eccentric training is beneficial. So you can do these 5 or 6 different exercises, but there still needs to be an eccentric overload. I think that just kind of is one thing we tend to see when we go back through these things and go, okay, well, we haven't actually done any eccentric work for a couple of weeks. Or we may have just done 1 set here and 2 sets there, and it's kind of been ad hoc. And then turn around and go, okay, well, that actually makes sense. And then another one is as come back to consistency of it. So I think it can be, okay, you might be a very important athlete who's had a history of recurrent injuries. You smack them a lot in preseason. They do a lot of hammy-centric stuff. They run fast. They get in season. They don't do anything. Or they might have a week or 2 weeks where they've got 5-day turnarounds and they can't get 2 sessions in a week. So that kind of flows onto a couple of weeks and turn around. It's been 12 to 14 days since they've done any eccentric stuff. And then there's soreness, there's conversations in that space. And then typically in that period, because you might have reduced number of sessions and modified loads because of the high match stuff, they won't run fast. Or they might only hit 80, 85%. And they won't hit 90, 95% plus. And you kind of, again, easy to do retrospectively, but I think the common thing is that we see is they do remove that eccentric stimulus. Well, they say they're doing hammy stuff, and there's just kind of a lot of concentric or isometric based stuff. And then the consistent overload of, this consistent application of eccentric stimulus and consistently running fast are things that tend to just get easy drops, right? Where you've got a game with 5-day turnaround, +1 you're recovering, +2 you might do a bit of a flush run. Then you've got 3 days, 3 games, so you're not doing Nordics. And you won't run fast, probably not, depending on your program. And you back that into another game, you might have a couple of days off, and you turn around, it's been 10 days since you've done Nordic to run fast. And then chasing that becomes the hardest thing. And so then I think coming up with some strategies around that, how do you then ensure that these people who have chronic history still receive some eccentric stimulus, no matter what the week is, they still run fast no matter what the week becomes their priority, because otherwise then it becomes easy in retrospect to say, but that's a pretty common theme in some of the big trouble cases that we've seen.
And you mentioned earlier how you want to be outcome based and make sure that you're clear on exactly what we're trying to achieve and therefore what's the stimulus you're looking to get. For athletes that are in season, I guess strength and conditioning coaches or strength and power program coaches that are prescribing the program, where do you do you just go off what the Nord board is for that athlete? Maybe you're doing that once a week with the athletes and monitoring that in terms of outcome based. So don't change the exercise if they're still maintaining a good level. Let's say 500 on the Nord board and there's good symmetry there. They're getting their velocity exposures above 90%, 95%. And if you're happy, or is it a matter of other things that we need to be looking at in terms of measuring whether we are achieving the outcome other than those two areas?
I guess it kind of comes back to again, to take the bench press as an example, right? Like, irrespective of if you're hitting your PBs and your bench press, you're hitting your PBs and what you're doing, you're still going to progressively overload and do alternatives too. You're not just going to do bench press. You might do dumbbells. You might do incline press. You might have other variations that you might do, because it will give you a stimulus to help you then drive that goal. And if your goal is to increase bench press strength, I can chuck in all these other variations at different intensities or whatever to help me achieve X. Whereas, say, the Nordic, or it's always kind of, well, to get stronger in the Nordic, we just do more Nordics. Well, that's part of it, but they said there's so many other variations that you can do in the gym, such as sliders and back extensions, those kind of things that can help you get stronger to then drive that application. So I think that's one thing that can come back to what's the goal, what's the stimulus you want to drive, because there's 1,000 ways to get stronger. There's so many different exercises you can do. You can program, periodize it 15 different ways to get someone stronger. And that's a strength coach's job, right? They should be able to find exercises to get someone stronger. How they do it, with what exercises and what stimulus, might be the kind of the minutiae within the kind of conversation that sometimes gets lost. So we know eccentric training is good for increasing fascicle length. It's good for improving sometimes rate of force development stuff and, making you stronger. But if you want to struggle with other stuff and you get something stronger, it might have competing adaptations, say, from a fascicle length perspective, but it still might improve rate of force development and it still might improve strength. So, So if you're still doing eccentric stuff, you're still going to make them longer fascicles, but you can probably do a few other things that may impact that, but you've got a performance aspect as well, right? You've got to be strong, you've got to be able to produce force fast. So other exercises will build towards that and hopefully support that goal and outcome too. So, so I think they're kind of, I know it's a different way to think about it, but if the adaptation is fascicle lengthening is a big one, we know that eccentric training, either high volume or high intensity, is positive for that. But in reality, the athletes aren't going to do that on its own. They're going to have all these other things that will contribute to being strong on the Nord board and getting stronger. And they might just be a well-structured lower body strength program that has overload, periodization, has 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 hamstring exercises, like you said, a knee and a hip, does it well, lift heavy, progress, overload, progress, and you'll get stronger. Having the Nordic in there, obviously part of that will be a good stimulus for fascicle lengthening too.
A tough one without context, but I guess where do you like to see the order of these exercises put in? Is it the last thing an athlete does? Is it maybe part of a prehab, sort of a start of a warm-up routine? Is it a tricep where they're doing a heavy lift and they're doing some resilience work in amongst that? What do you think's? I guess if you're going to do it, if you're going to do it majority of the time of an in-season, where would you like for it to fit?
Yeah, I know. Reality-wise, and the evidence we know, doing these exercises fresh will give you the best adaptation you can get. But it's in reality, from a research perspective and a data perspective, we know that. But in reality, no one's going to make the $1 million player do 264 Nordics with extra weight on the chest and then go do a 7K training session. Because if they break down, they're going to come straight for you. They go for the theory of the evidence. They're going to go, okay, you've just busted our best player. So in reality, it's how you do that around the stimulus. Again, I know people worry soreness is a big thing. Being able to deal with soreness is I think, especially at higher level, a lot of conversations around being positive around soreness. Soreness is a good thing. Adaptation is a good thing because it's driving adaptation. So being sore is good as long as it's not pain. Pain and soreness are 2 different things. And just kind of get that mental aspect right. I think that's good. But yeah, it's in reality, you've kind of, if you want to do Nordics first up in the morning, we know it's going to be positive for you. And we definitely know when you're fresh, most of these resistance training exercises are probably better focused on what you want to drive, the adaptation you want. But in reality, no one's going to go do that pre-training. So post-training, obviously that. And then it just comes down to what else you kind of got in for the day. And the hard thing with the Nordic, you've got a calf strengthening program at the same time as a hamstring strengthening program. We know hammies, cross the knees, calves, cross the knees. So then if you had that might take away from what you're trying to do. And then you've got to prioritise the adaptation you want. So if today's focus is hammy based, okay, Nordics come first, comes earlier, calf stuff towards the end. If they're starting to have calf issues, maybe this calf stuff takes priorities and the hammy stuff kind of gets dripped in towards the end. Because we know the fresher they are, then probably the better they'll respond to that exercise and they won't become kind of counterintuitive to each other. But yeah.
Yep. No,
do noise before you go on the pitch, mate. Tell me how you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you had your choice, if the athlete said, I want you to take full control of my program, and it's a hamstring return to play, and they've got no anxiety with doing anything, they'll do it in any order, full belief in the program. Is where would you put it in there? Would it be fresh first thing they do?
Yeah. I know the evidence is there to suggest it and supports it, but it's easy to say hypothetically because. Yeah, when they go out there and they feel a bit sore from the exercises, and you tell them to run 95%, they'll laugh at you. So, how you periodize that might be a good thing. So you might do that on a day where they're not smashing max. Yeah, they're not smashing max speeds. It might just be a cardio day, and then max speeds days they're kind of doing other stuff, but they're feeling fresh enough from the hammies perspective to do it.
Yep. And in your research, has there been any sort of recent findings that? I guess either you've changed your philosophy or your methods over the last sort of couple more recent, so I guess a year or two, that perhaps hasn't quite transferred into elite sport, or more commonly in certainly in, I guess, everybody's practical setting that's not in research and haven't got their finger on the pulse. Is there anything that's drastically changed or slightly tweaked that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I guess the thing I always realise is that elite sports probably a couple of years ahead of research anyway. In reality, because we have so many things that we need to do in the research space to actually implement half these things, because we need ethical approval, we need participants, we need all that stuff. That takes time to run intervention from a concept to outcome to then get it published. It can take 18 months. Whereas you might have that conversation with someone in the field. So we might go get a coffee. I'm like, actually, you know what? I've learned about this recently. This actually possibly theoretically makes a good idea. Like, have a go and see what you reckon. And that stuff tends to be, to be fair, that was the conversation we had at the sporting club around low volume Nordics. They were saying, we get our players back from off season. They've only had a couple of weeks. We then have 5 weeks before the season starts. How do we actually get some stuff into them? Can do low volume Nordics work? We're like, don't know, let's find out. Took us 18 months to do it, but they were already doing it. So it was kind of, it's hard to say that, but yes, typically industry are in front of what we're doing. But the big stuff we're looking at a bit more now and is probably looking at tendon and kind of the aponeurosis, how muscle, we spoke about fascicles, which are part of the muscle, but to create movement, the muscle needs to transmit force through the tendon to the bone, contracts and it moves. So if the transmitter can't withstand the force that the generator is producing, and we're getting a break somewhere in that weak link, are we making these people too strong? Are we making them too strong too quick? Which then I think feeds back into the concept around these whole intramuscular tendon things, and that maybe we're making, and this comes back to your question just then, is maybe rethink a little bit, are we making these people too strong? Because we're pretty good at making people strong nowadays, but are we making them strong too quick? And they get these really big, strong engines, but they just can't transmit it. They can't handle how much force is getting pushed out, and there's something breaks at some point after some damage and some overload. So can we possibly, some stuff we're trying to do now is, can we drive adaptations in that tendon, in that aponeurosis, to hopefully reduce that kind of risk of the transmitter breaking, and hopefully not have that as many kind of those intramuscular situations. But yeah, that's kind of the main one for me at the moment. How do we actually deal with that transmission of force? But then even some of the work that came out of the Aspetar Hospital in Qatar, looking at the intramuscular tendon stuff and how they're treated differently. So that the athletes in Qatar all get MRIs and they come into a study. The researcher and the clinicians are all blind to that data. So you might have intramuscular tendon, 3C, roll in, but you'll get the rehab that they see how you respond. So you come to the clinic, do all your tests, you go out to the gym, you do your exercises, irrespective if you've had tendon or no tendon, because they don't look at the MRI. So they treat you blinded based on the MRI. And then the results that they're showing is that those that with intramuscular tendon involvement, unless it's like 100% kind of separation, are returning on a similar time frame as those without intramuscular tendon involvement, but they're just treating them without seeing the MRI. Those with 100% kind of separation, the tendon probably had an extra 7 days on top.
Mm-hmm.
Re-injury rates were comparable. There's no complete difference in that. So again, that's kind of made me rethink a few things around. If we look at
And
these
that was
MRI,
around 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, so they're kind of token. They're probably 2s, 3s. They're not kind of big high end guys. But I think, if you look at, you think about your concept of this. Okay, bad injury, key player, get an MRI, show intramuscular tendon, sweet, it's either surgery or 16 weeks, 12, 16 weeks. Whereas now, is it possibly that 12 weeks is just because we see the tendon involvement? Tendon involvement, pretty significant injury. Either we cut it open and sew it up, or we wait 12 weeks to do conventional rehab and cut it open anyway. So most people just go and cut it open 2-3 days post-injury because it saves them weeks. But is that because of the MRI telling us that? Whereas you could have a person complete rehab fine. It kind of comes back to the whole concept of who's going to be brave enough to do it.
Yeah.
Because if you roll around and go, there's our club captain, he's an intramuscular tendon, I reckon we can rehab him in the same time frame as another guy, but he's the best player. Whereas if we surgically repair him, we know he's back in 10 to 12 weeks. Whereas if we do this, it could work for 4 weeks and then he cooks it or doesn't progress at the rate we want him to progress and gets cut open anyway. So then you lose a month. So, and that's the thing, who's brave enough to do it. But I think, the evidence probably needs a bit more around it before I start kind of pushing that. But I think definitely treating the person, not the scan, is definitely a big thing. But knowing that the scan can be useful, but in those scenarios, you've got to be brave enough to pull it off.
Going back to what you mentioned earlier, that perhaps we could be potentially increasing the strength aspect. Do we need to be increasing the velocity exposures a bit more and addressing that, and to balance up the slower, I guess, contractions that we're doing with the max force training to, I guess, train more the tendon, where maybe we're doing more biased muscle training? Not that they're separate like that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's the thing is we don't know from a hammy tendon perspective what's good for it. We know from a tendinopathy kind of aspect, isometrics, tendons love isometrics. But is that the right way in the hammy? Is that the right way for the intramuscular? We know, but that's the thing. I don't think we actually have as much evidence as we'd like to actually say do intervention X to lead to positive tendon adaptations that might be good. And the funny thing is, we could do all this and turn around and just be doing some training, lift heavy, right? And then we go, well, we're still getting injured. But it could be an aspect of maybe we are going to do this low, slow, heavy stuff in the gym. We need to run fast. I think those two variables together are going to be pretty good. But then, are we doing it too much too soon? Do we need to actually spend some time to give the tendon might adapt at a different rate than a muscle does? We can see muscle architectural adaptations within 2 weeks. The tendon might take an extra 2 weeks on that. Which adaptation of the tendon do we want to see? is a thicker tendon good? Like, do we want to promote an increase in cross-sectional area so we can transmit more force? Is that a good thing? Do we know? Like, it's all these kind of questions where I think we're definitely making people stronger. And I think there's aspect of how strong can we make them, which is always good. But then how does this kind of transmitter come into play and its capacity to move that force through the muscle? And I think, there's a lot of questions in that space. And again, I think the industry is probably taking up some of these questions and going, okay, we'll just chuck in some isometrics just to see if that helps, because we know at the calf it helps, patella tendon it helps. So let's just chuck that in the hammy, because it might just cover our ass if it does or doesn't help, but it might be an aspect that could be something we can do. So, but then in 3 or 4 years' time, we might turn around and go, actually, you know what, you've been doing the right thing for 4 years. So, but who knows? We'll have to see how we go.
Throw everything at it and see what pops up. That sort of feeds into my last question on this topic in terms of what do you envision, I guess, future research spending time and advancements in this space. But I think you pretty much covered it there. Is anything on this topic in terms of mitigating hamstring injuries and helping return to play that you'd like to touch on, Ryan, before we wrap it up?
No, I think, from my end, and some people can overcomplicate stuff and chuck in 15 different exercises and train the glutes to do this and do switches and isometrics and all that stuff is great. But we know the evidence suggests do eccentric training, do it regularly, run fast, do it regularly, get strong, overload, progress, run fast, overload, progress. You do that, I think at a base level, you'd be pretty sweet, and you'd probably be doing a lot better than most professional sports. Some teams, just because obviously you've got fixtures, knees, hips, backs, all those things. Eccentric regularly, run fast regularly, and be consistent. I think you'll tick off a lot of the adaptations you want to drive.
It's a good way to finish it off. Some actionable tips there. Last 3 questions, mate, separate to the key topic. In your work life, have you got any pet peeves, anything that sort of fires you up from an industry perspective?
I have a nickname as my nickname is Sketch, because I just love the schedule. I love timing. I hate when people just aren't on time, aren't on schedule, and it's like, and they say you're going to do something, and they don't do it, and chuck it in and they reschedule it. I know it's from a planning perspective. Now that I've got a 5-month-old son, every hour of the day you've got to be, because if not, then I know bedtime's in an hour and a half, so I get the kitchen ready for dinner and all those things, right? So
time is precious.
Time is precious, mate. That's the main one.
It's a good one. That one actually hasn't popped up, but I reckon it will resonate with most. What's your favourite way to spend your day off?
Sleeping. No, I think
bank some quality sleep.
Yeah,
bank 5 months as well.
Banking that, or just day off. Now, little guy just moving to a new place. It's getting back, and then some mates later on. But nothing really. Like, I'm not kind of like go play golf or go to the beach, those kind of things. It'll happen if it happens, but just kind of take it as it comes. I think a lot of priorities shift now when you're father of one in the house, and you need to clean and look after and maintain. Today got the axe out in the backyard. I was cutting down tree stumps. So it's never done that in my entire life. So I've got blisters on my thumb.
Well, and obviously we're recording in July or August now, middle of the year of 2023. What's on the horizon for you, mate? What are you most excited about for the rest of the year?
For me, it's probably just now I've been at ACU Brisbane for just over a year. Obviously, I was at ACU Melbourne for 8 or 9 years and made the move back to Queensland for family. Just excited to get that space. We've got a good performance team. Shona Halson and John Weekly and Rich Johnson are all kind of doing up at ACU Brisbane. But for me, just adding that injury space, and we've got some pretty positive stuff evolving on the campus there. So just looking forward to digging into that a bit more and growing that stuff.
Fantastic. And for those that have got any follow-up questions, where's the best place to get in contact?
So for me, Twitter at Ryan underscore, not Twitter, it's X now, isn't it? No. At Ryan underscore Timmins, or Ryan.Timmins at acu.edu.au. The easiest one.
Perfect. Yeah, too easy. We'll add the Twitter link and your email in the show notes for those that might be listening to the recording while driving. And yeah, thank you for everyone that's tuned in live. Our next live chat is with Cameron Ferguson. That's 4:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, the Thursday, the 10th of August. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks again, Ryan.